start by introducing everyone. On the far right, Tina Hendon with Environmental Protection Agency. In the middle, Carrie Neiman with Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I'm here in the white, Leslie Rauscher, did I say that right? With the Environmental Protection Agency, Region 6. And over here we have Erin Wendt with the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board. We're going to start it off by handing the microphone to Leslie, and she's going to start us off with a little presentation.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Good morning. I'm Leslie Rauscher, again with EPA. Welcome this morning. Thanks for making the drive down here to Aggieland. How many Aggies do we have in the house? That's right. Well, this is kind of a homecoming for me too. I haven't been on campus for like 9 years, 10 years, I couldn't remember. And back in the day, I used to, look at old Army, coming to check out how things had changed. And I'm like, oh gosh. Well, I'm old Army, and I'm like, oh, things have changed, boy. So anyway, I know you guys are here to talk about Clean Water Act, not my reminiscing of the good old Aggie days. So let's get right into it. I'm going to talk briefly about GAO's report. As you guys may or may not have known, the Government Accountability Office was asked by Congress to do a study of the 319 program, and they had several questions to ask of the program, and so GAO launched on a 2-year effort, and they just released their final report on July 2nd, so this is kind of hot off the press, although we do have some initial look at what they were, the direction they were headed. We've just really kind of started drilling down into what the report has said. So my presentation today is focused on what that report highlights for us. And of course, you're welcome to read it and take a look at it. So I'm going to highlight the findings of the report and kind of some of the anticipated changes to the program on a national scale and the schedule that we're looking at for those changes. So really quickly, here's a link if you want to read all the gory details. It's actually not a long report. It's about 85 pages plus the appendices, so that's where you can take a look at it. So basically, GAO took a look at 6 years worth of data that we have in our GRIDS database, which some of you may or may not be familiar with, but that's the database that the states use to report on the good work that you guys are doing out in the watersheds. So based on that information, they looked at 5,800 projects up there, and that's a total of about $1.2 billion worth of projects that they examined. So what they looked at and said was that about 28% of those projects didn't meet their objectives. And that's kind of where they drilled down. Although 72% of the projects that they looked at had met most of the intended objectives, they really drilled down on that 28%. So whether or not that's really a fair assessment, it just depends on how you're looking at it. One of the things that they said was in those projects that they looked at, there were challenges that could have perhaps been avoided if there had been a little bit better project planning in advance. And so that kind of points to some of the recommendations later on. So the key findings from this report is overall EPA needs to improve its oversight, and we need to consider additional ways of measuring the program's success. And we can start also by improving how we're selecting projects for funding. And the other question, which was kind of interesting that Congress asked GAO to look into, was how well does the 319 program work with the USDA's EQIP program? So that was another recommendation that we need to continue coordinating better with them. So regarding our oversight, one of the things that came out for us internally, and as well as the other states, because I think this question comes up a lot, is, well, how are other regions implementing the program compared to Region 6? And GAO determined that not all the regions are consistently administering the program. So there's a wide range of how the regions are looking into the states from a non-point source management plan perspective. Some regions had not required some of their states to update their management plans since 1999. Region 6, how does this compare? That would be a good question to ask our state agencies because we do require them to update on a 5-year schedule consistent with the current guidelines. But some of our regions were not doing that. So we've got states out in the country with a wide scope of management plans. Some of them have been updated, some of them have not. The other thing that GAO is saying is that we should be reviewing the project selection criteria and looking at annual work scopes. Again, the regions were very different. As some of you may have experience, we do ask a lot of questions. We do engage with our state agencies and looking at projects that come up for annual funding. So how Region 6 compares is we are pretty engaged in that process. The other question that GAO was looking at is, when we fund these projects, how effective are they in achieving their water quality goals? And so what they've determined is that EPA should be working on that a little bit better.
Can I ask a question over here?
Sure.
So does the GAO give any credit at all for partial attainment of the goal, or is it just if it doesn't achieve full attainment, then it's no credit given?
Right. Well, that's one of the things that I'm going to cover next. And what GAO did say is that we should be expanding our measures of success to give credit for partial successes or partial improvements in water quality. And the way that we frame the program right now, we're not quite allowing for that. So that was something that GAO did say. And I skipped over this, but one of their recommendations at the executive level is for our headquarters staff to come up with guidelines, not for the program itself, but on how the regions are supposed to administer the program. So it's a little bit different, but that's one of the things that GAO is recommending. So going back to your question, yes, GAO did say our 2 program measures, which right now we're basing it on loading reductions and improvements in water quality based on the 303D list, they're saying that may be too narrow, and then there needs to be some attention paid on how we can expand those program measures of success to capture some of those partial improvements. And one of the things that came out as GAO went and did their investigation, they didn't just look at the data, but they did interview several states. Some of you may or may not have been asked to provide some feedback about some of your projects, but they did go through that process of asking questions. And some of the feedback that they received from the states was that in some cases there's limitations placed on how the measures of success determine what projects they're going to select. And so this is the feedback that they received, that, you know, in some occasions, the projects that are going to yield the greatest, I guess, bean count would be one way that could be stated, or those projects that are going to get funded, but they may not be the projects that really address the water quality issues. And because we place such an emphasis on the 303D list, that protection may not be getting a fair chance, especially in situations where states have determined that that's going to generate meaningful impact. So what GAO is recommending here that we take a look at is look at measures that are broader and consider the overall health of the targeted water bodies. And this might get into maybe some bioassessment type of thing. And then focus on protecting high water quality bodies where appropriate. So that's opening the door to kind of balance some of the restoration and the protection concerns. Now getting into more of the details. selecting effective projects, what GAO found was that in some cases there's some challenges when working with third parties. Obviously, this is a voluntary program, but in some cases the projects that are selected in those situations may not be clearly linked to the water quality results. So it's a balance of the need versus the willingness of that landowner or third-party participant to engage on those projects. And because we are relying on voluntary participation, some of those practices may not be as effective. They may address the concerns of the third party, but may not have that water quality impact. So what GAO is recommending is that states use more rigorous project selection process, and that EPA become more involved in looking at those projects and asking those specific questions. And as far as coordinating with USDA's EQIP program, one of the things that GAO came out and said was, look, when EQIP's out funding some EMPs in 319 watersheds, there may be an unintended consequence that may not be as positive on water quality as it could be, but they were not able to really answer that question for sure because of the way that USDA aggregates that data on a national level. And so that presented a challenge. So they're saying, based on what they're seeing, there could be some issues there. So their recommendation is to charge an RCS and look at the data to figure out if those are some issues that need to be addressed. If they are funding perhaps some BMPs without the companion BMPs to really mitigate some of those adverse impacts. And in order to do that, both USDA and EPA really need to be engaged and working together. So now getting down to where we headed with this. This is the second study. OMB did the first study at the request of EPA headquarters, and this is GAO's findings. So headquarters has been engaged in the regions and the states in a process that's lasted almost, I think, 6 months, maybe a little bit longer, to look at some ways to enhance the program and change some of the things that we need to address moving forward. So one of the proposals is that by this fall, probably late October, we will see a draft revised 319 guidelines released from headquarters. States would have an opportunity to look at that, and then by November 30th, we'll have final guidance issued. One of the things that they also implemented based out of the OMP study was we needed to do a better job at a regional level in looking at how well the state's programs were doing from year to year. And this is what we term a satisfactory progress document that we've implemented this past year, gone through and answered a set of questions. And so that practice is going to carry forward, and all the regions will be required to do that before we award any funds for 319. And as part of that, GAO said not all the states have an updated management plan. By 2013, at least 50% of our states, the goal is to have updated plans completed. Region 6 is in a pretty good position. I think all of our states have a plan either underway or already approved. I know Texas is in-house right now, being reviewed by us. So as far as that's concerned, we're in good shape. And then the other thing, of course, that OMB is very interested, especially in this climate that we're in, that we improve our management and track funds better, and then tie that to outcomes. So one of the proposals that headquarters is entertaining is changing how the funding is structured and perhaps allowing about 50% of the funding to go into implementation, on the ground implementation type of projects. But that's just a proposal. Nothing's final yet until we see it in the final guidelines come November. And another proposal that's currently being vetted is how do we leverage funding with other programs? We've got the state revolving fund, we've got perhaps other state funding that could be available. So we're looking at ways where we can restructure our funding and maybe offer incentives to leverage more resources. And at some point, but not by November 30th, EPA will start looking at ways of developing additional measures of success, whether they're interim measures or whatever we end up calling them. That's on the horizon at some point after the guidelines are issued. And we are already well underway in doing our enhanced collaboration with the USDA and EQIP. So hopefully that will really start generating some meaningful impact in the way that projects are administered on the ground. So there's a lot of things coming down the line. Changes are probably going to be in effect come the FY14 funding schedule. I know that's something that you're probably very curious about. We don't know what that funding is going to look like. GAO didn't oppose cutting back or scaling back the program. That's something that Congress determines. And given what we've seen in the past 2 years, we have had a reduction in funds, anywhere from 10% to, I don't know, can't remember exactly now, but I think it's probably a safe thing to say that we will see additional cuts to the program in FY13, given the climate and where we are as a country. To what extent, we don't know, but I think some of these things will help us realign our program and help you guys get some good, effective projects on the ground for the resources that we have. So, again, here's our staff contacts. Tina is our technical program manager for Texas. I'm the project officer for TCQ, and my partner in crime, Henry Brewer, he, as a graduate of UT, was not worthy to step on hollow ground, so he stayed back and, doing the dirty work of reports and all that good stuff. So you couldn't be with us today, but if you have any questions, here's our information. This is how we can be reached. We're always open and available to help answer some of the questions that you have. And I know there's going to be time on the agenda to do that, so I'm going to pass it over to Carrie. Are you next? Or is Aaron next? No? Aaron? Okay, thank you.
Questions ready? Any questions on discussions of 319 programs or? Yes, Lauren.
I've never worked in permitting, so my ignorance is going to show a little bit. But it's my understanding that a lot of the permitting programs, when permits are issued, be tied to water bodies on 303D list are not necessarily directly tied, so permits are not reviewed for that purpose, but our voluntary non-point source program is. Was there any discussion with that at a national level about maybe looking at the way other programs are measured for success and maybe looking at tying 319 more similarly? I'm not saying regulatory, I'm just saying measuring the successes.
I'm trying to recall if any of that came up in the national work group discussions. And by that I mean that in order to get some of these draft guidelines put together, EPA assembled work groups composed of regions and states to kind of bat some of these issues around. I don't recall that discussion came up in the work group that I sat on, other than to say that the TMDL program perhaps is one that is being looked at from that angle, perhaps not through the lens that you're asking about. So I don't think that question is coming. It could, though, because EPA is postponing, headquarters is postponing, looking at additional program measures, because that's just too much to bite right now. Our focus is on, let's get some revised guidelines on the ground, and then we'll fill in some of the details of how we can demonstrate more success in the program. And one of them is also how to communicate the successes of the program. Non-point source is a tricky beast, and so we may not be able to have the bean counts that some other programs have in order to communicate that success to Congress. And so that's one of the things that headquarters is going to be engaged in developing a way to communicate the successes of the program to Congress and to the public.
Anyone else in the audience?
I was just curious, the 28% of the projects that didn't meet expectations, was there a state-by-state breakdown in the GAO report, and where did Texas fall?
I don't recall seeing a breakdown of projects. It could have been buried in the appendix, but it was not in the body. I think they made a concerted effort not to point fingers at particular states, and then I think they tried to stay kind of above that.
You know, on behalf of Texas, though, obviously, and you know, our representation of you as our contractors and our projects and how they're managed. We, as a program, the TCQ, update the grant reporting tracking system on a monthly basis, so that exceeds the requirement. And we use that report. I use it to facilitate, you know, where projects stand in my program, and they kind of are the backbone for my one-on-one meetings with staff every month. And so I feel like we have a real good pulse on our projects, and we're able to, you know, identify any issues or concerns early on so that we can address them with the contractors. And if we have significant problems, we can then talk to our project officers at EPA about reallocating funds or making sure that we do good things with the money, spend the money down. That was certainly emphasized, and you know, it's just really important for us to represent ourselves well, you well, through the grant reporting tracking system that GAO used. And last time I checked, I think we had maybe one project that had a problem, and it's so ancient. It's like back in 2004, 2003. It's been closed out a long time ago, and there's no way to go back and actually fix that. So, you know, there's a concerted effort to reflect well at the national level on behalf of my agency.
I was wondering if there's any word on success measures for preventative watershed protection plans. I know those brought up at the last roundtable, and I didn't see any views.
Would you repeat the question, please?
I was just asking for if there's any update on when success measures for preventative watershed protection plans will be out, or if there's.
Right, that's a very important question that was debated in recent work group discussions. EPA is hearing the call to balance restoration and protection to some extent. Still, the call is going to be, well, what are you doing to clean up problems out there? But we're also hearing cleaning up protecting some of those issues from happening also has a value, but how do you measure that? So it's come up, and it will, I think, continue to be a topic of discussion once these different options that are being discussed for updating the guidelines once those are final, then I think it will trigger the next logical steps of looking at those program measures for both additional measures program-wide and then for allowing more funding to go to protecting watersheds. How do you measure that? And I think one of the discussions in the GAO report was to look at the aquatic ecosystem as a measure of health and what you were protecting in those watersheds. So I think that stay tuned is probably some things to start discussing next year.
Debbie.
One of the things we've learned over doing the watershed protection plan is that the small cities within a watershed have very little, they don't have the staff to maintain a lot of the requirements of each of those 319 projects. Some of those projects need to be done in those very small communities, but they don't have the resources. So when they see what's required of them, reporting, and I'm not saying that's a wrong thing to require that of anyone, the type of reporting, but it is so overwhelming that they're not jumping at 60%. You would think, man, that's 60%, but they don't have to do it, it's voluntary. And when they don't have staff to maintain everything, it's difficult to entice them to take advantage of the project. I'm curious if there are discussions at EPA on some things that you can offer as tools to both the agencies, or if other states have developed ways to entice these smaller cities or help give them ways of navigating through all of the administration that needs to be done and that kind of thing. And, just curious if that's, I don't know, that's not directly related to the GAO report, but that's sort of a path forward.
Well, I have heard that comment, and I can definitely understand and respect that decision, especially given where local governments are, especially at a very small scale. I don't know that we have looked at that as an issue from a national program perspective. Certainly it's something that we could look at from a state perspective when it comes to leveraging resources and creating those partnerships. There could be some tools and resources out there that local governments could access. Certainly there's 22 council of governments throughout the state. Some of them may or may not have the infrastructure to help some of these small communities, but certainly the university infrastructure and COG infrastructure, some of those things may not have been considered yet, but I was just looking over here at Carrie, that maybe something we just note and say we should dedicate a little bit of time thinking and brainstorming about how to leverage those resources, especially if the new guidelines have provisions or incentives for leveraging those partnerships. That would be a good question to talk about.
I would certainly encourage that too. Second, third.
What we can do too, Debbie, is we can look at these projects on a case-by-case basis and see if we can't plug in some of our partners that are experienced with dealing with the administrative requirements, either on behalf of the board or the TCQ, and we can have them deal with the administration of those requirements, kind of as a filter, if you will, for those requirements, and not have the city necessarily have to deal with us directly. So that's a way of kind of getting around that. I think we could certainly entertain that in proposals, and we can emphasize that in stakeholder meetings that we have, work group meetings that we have in watersheds where we're developing these watershed plans or getting ready to implement them, whether they be a TMDL implementation plan or a watershed protection plan. Either way, we can certainly do the best we can to. I sympathize with those cities. I certainly sympathize with the partners that we have. That we're kind of we have to implement the program, and those are the requirements that come down to the accountability that's associated with it, which is reflected in many ways in the studies that have just been done. And so anytime, like, Leslie kind of brushed upon the economic climate of our country, we can start to scrutinize how those funds are being spent, and if they're being spent well, et cetera. Well, that usually trickles down to us, and we have to show more accountability, and it ends up as being more administrative requirements. And so I certainly sympathize with the partners, and we stand ready to work with them in any way we can. And as from a project level, I'd like to look at maybe plugging in some of our partners to maybe handle the administrative requirements for them.
Can you give us some feedback? I'm curious, perhaps not right now, but on one-on-one conversation or through just general feedback, what are those administrative things? I mean, there are certain things that are pretty hard set that we try to follow, but those are some areas where maybe we can exercise a regional flexibility. Hearing what your concerns are, what are those administrative hurdles will help us to see if there is something that we can be a little bit more flexible on. Just provide us with that feedback. We've got Carrie's contact and our contact information here, so we're happy to hear some of that.
Just an opposite perspective from a small city perspective. Talk to large cities and they're like, the entire budget for all of the 319 programs for all of Texas is less than we spend vacuuming our schools, which is a huge amount. Slides or slides. So we're kind of two different perspectives. They've definitely got the administrative capabilities, but
well, I think that might show where you're going to have the most impact might be in those small communities with these funds. It means a lot to them.
Well, and certainly the question is, how are those projects going to be benefiting the water quality issues, whether it's protection or restoration effort? That really is the heart of the question that we ask. And GAO is telling us we need to be asking those questions when we're looking at those projects. And so, there is a balancing act with the funding and the scale of partners. And I think it really boils down to each watershed is going to be very individual in the scope and its issues. And so when we're looking at that, we also try to keep in mind those issues too.
Any other questions, comments? I was just wondering, with the severe drought that we've had that's impacted being able to monitor the water because some of the stations are dry and do some of the BMP measures over the last couple of years, especially here in Texas and the South. Do you feel that kind of impacted a little bit of some of the projects, or were we able to articulate the struggles that we were going through due to this extreme climate?
I think GAO did ask that question, but the data that they were looking at, I think, was really not
farther back.
Some of the current issues that we are seeing show up in our projects because of the drought. So that would be an interesting question to ask maybe in a couple years when that data really starts showing up. But I believe one of the states was asked that question, is how does the drought impact your BMP selection, your management of the BMP? But I don't know that if that data really could answer the question.
So that may be something that we need to be articulating in our reporting now. We would hope to have better numbers, but we can't be due to the drought.
Right, no, I'm glad you that was a good segue to what I was going to say. At a higher level, and Aaron and I are going to talk about this in a moment, in terms of the update that was made to the non-point source management program, there's language that's actually been added into the management program that does recognize that there are those variables that occur, and as a result are milestones that are in Appendix E of the management program can be influenced by those variables, such as drought, hurricanes, things like this, the economic climate, funding, etc. That can all have a profound impact on the quality of projects that we receive and fund annually and on the progress of projects individually.
Any other questions up there? Les?
How do you see Texas measuring up to satisfactory progress moving forward with the mechanisms we have in place, like the management program, et cetera?
Can you repeat your question?
I'm sure the question was, how does Texas measure up in the satisfactory progress determination? This is the first year that we were really asked to go through a very formal, detailed process. You know, the determination of how well the state was doing was done a little bit more informally to some extent, at least compared to what headquarters has asked us to do starting this year and moving forward. This year was kind of like the benchmark. So we've assessed where the state is right now. We've looked at where the strengths and weaknesses are and put it on paper and we'll use that kind of as a benchmark moving forward. I have to say that, you know, when GAO said, you know, the regions are not doing this or states are not doing that, we were able to at least put in writing where we were in our strengths is in reporting, maintaining that grids database updated, as Carrie mentioned earlier, and well in advance of updating the state's management program. So I think that puts us in a good position. You know, it's difficult to look at how other states are doing it, but if you're talking about administrative, I would say that Texas is pretty strong. If you're looking at the successes of the program, the way that we're measuring them as far as water quality success stories, we have some improvement to make. But you know, you've got to keep in mind, states, as we all know, each program is going to be a little bit different. And that was the struggle that we were trying to address at the headquarters level, and GAO pointed that out. There's inconsistencies in the way the program's managed. Let's fix some of those, at least at the administrative level, and then move from there. But that's what we've attempted to do with the satisfactory progress checklist. So there is no pass or fail, there is no scoring as far as that goes, but it gives us the data to be able to go back and say, okay, this is where we need to tweak. We're doing good here, let's not mess with that. And this is where we need to focus our energies on.
Are these reports available online? The GAO report and report.
Sure, yeah, GAO's report, if you go to, pull it up here, so gao.gov/products, GAO/12-335. So that's the report number that you can search under.
I pulled it up.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it would be really helpful to know where improvements are needed so that when we develop our project applications, then we know how to structure them or craft them so that we can fill our needs.
Sure.
Reporting is okay, so we don't have to do more reporting than we already do perhaps, but if we want to have more success stories, I think we really get a story from you about how to get there.
You know, like I said, Aaron and I are going to talk a little bit about the management program. And there are two things in the management program that really, I think the most important is the Watershed Action Plan process, which is Chapter 3 of the management program. And that is really the framework which we'll use to really, you know, assign strategies to listings and prioritize those listings so that we can coordinate and leverage our resources. And I'm really going to stress that here in a moment to kind of do a full court press in certain watersheds so that we can get results and that we can get everybody plugged in and doing whatever, you know, performing whatever role they can in that particular watershed. And so that's on us, and I think we've responded well to it, and it's reflected in the management program. We've only gone through one cycle of the Watershed Action Planning process. It's kind of, you know, in many ways kind of a trial run, but The benefit to the 319 program, and this is what I saw early on, and I'm really excited about this, is it provides us with a priority watershed report. And that priority watershed report helps us guide and direct our applicants into those watersheds so that we can really solicit applications to do whatever work is necessary in that specific watershed. So if we do the work on the front end, and if folks, partners participate in the watershed action planning process, attend those meetings and get plugged in with their fellow, agencies or sister agencies or partners, and start to talk about, okay, how are we going to address this particular segment? Okay, we're going to start off with an intensive watershed survey, okay, watershed characterization. There are probably certain folks in this room that can perform certain aspects of that watershed characterization, whether it be land use planning, GIS mapping, PST, you name it. There's a whole, there's a buffet of things that need to be done. And so if we can plug those folks in there and leverage those resources like we've been talking about, and what GAO has emphasized, I think the watershed action planning process is a framework to make that happen. What we have to do is maybe get out and advertise it, do a better job from the state level and getting into these watersheds and talking on behalf of the watershed action planning process at Clean River program meetings or stakeholder meetings in general. And prior to our solicitations on behalf of both the board and the TCQ, coordinating with those applicants so that they can submit good applications that really, it's a competitive process. And so most importantly, what we want to do is if you're leveraging, that's good because we don't want you stepping on each other's toes applying for the same money, And so I think that there's an opportunity for success, and I'm hoping that this watershed action planning process is going to be the mechanism that gets us there.
Carrie, would you mind mentioning your deadline that's coming out quickly for your?
Yeah, our deadline is actually July 31st. That's when we have to receive all applications. The board is going to probably, Aaron, you're going to solicit that sometime here in the fall, right?
We'll release our request for proposals in late August is our tentative time.
Okay. So, that's what it is.
Was there anything else that you wanted to say about the WAP and that? You said you were going to talk about it.
Sure. Are we ready to go into that topic?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think I've kind of really summed it up there. The watershed action planning process is a framework for collaboration, for identifying, strategies that, we're going to propose for segments around the state and rolling in our partners in that designation, okay? So we're not necessarily prescribing that strategy be used in that particular segment, and what we're doing is we're soliciting with our partners, the stakeholders, to make sure that we have prescribed the right strategy and that the stakeholders are on board and comfortable with that strategy moving forward. So, for example, you take a segment and, are they ready for a watershed characterization? Are the stakeholders in the watershed, informed on water quality? Do they need a little bit of education and outreach? Maybe that's the first step that we take in that particular watershed before we go in and do a full court press on a watershed protection plan or a TMDL. I mean, those decisions need to be made, and the stakeholders, the folks within that watershed need to be rolled in to that process. And so we're excited about that. I think, it's a cycle that runs. There's a 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 12 o'clock. There's a great illustration in the management program in Chapter 3 that kind of plays it out. And then as a result of that, you get a priority watershed report. And then there's another illustration in that same chapter that kind of spins off that. And it's the TCQ's sort of process that we've illustrated on how that folds then into the RFGA and the work plan and the actual, a development of projects. And so, you know, plug yourselves into that process. I can't emphasize enough. You know, the carrot at the end of the stick is that if you plug yourself into the process, you're gonna find opportunities probably to leverage with your partners and get engaged in these watersheds, these priority watersheds across the state, and hopefully we can come together and get some results. I saw some encouraging things at the National Non-Point Source meeting up in Maryland, and one of the things that Kansas did that I was particularly impressed with was that they held the work or those partners in those watersheds accountable for the progress that they made. And so awards reflected that. So if partners were successful in, you know, a delisting or getting a project, you know, load reductions associated with that project, actually making progress in that watershed, they spend the money down, they meet all the administrative requirements, well then it was folded into their evaluation ranking process and it was reflected in such a way that, you know what, if they've proven that they can do good things with the money, then they should be rewarded for giving more money to do more good things. So I found that particularly interesting. And so, you know, I think I've set it up. I feel like Aaron probably hasn't gotten his fair share of this mic, so I'm going to pass it over to my sister partner agency in this program and let him say a few things.
Okay. Did that bring up any questions for anyone in the audience? Carrie's discussion? Any thoughts? Any thoughts, Aaron? No other questions? Well, we're a few minutes early, but I guess we can take a little bit longer networking break. There's a lot of coffee up there on the table, some bottled waters. You can find the restrooms and visit with each other. We'll come back here. Please be back here ready to get started by 11. Thank you.
Step out.